In the quiet suburban sprawl of Meadowview Estates, where manicured lawns gleamed under the relentless sun and every mailbox bore the same shade of HOA-approved beige, tension simmered beneath the surface. The neighborhood was a picture of order, with its cookie-cutter homes and pristine sidewalks, but it was ruled by an iron fist disguised as community governance. The Meadowview Homeowners Association, led by the indomitable Karen Whitlock, enforced rules with a zeal that bordered on obsession. Karen, a woman in her late 40s with a peroxide blonde bob and a penchant for pastel cardigans, was the self-appointed queen of compliance. Her clipboard was her scepter, her daily patrols her royal procession. No blade of grass grew too tall, no car parked an inch over the line, without Karen's swift and merciless intervention. To the residents, she was both a tyrant and a specter, her presence looming over every backyard barbecue and child's bike ride. Among the residents was the Callahan family, newcomers who had moved into 47 Birch Lane just 6 months prior. Jack Callahan, a retired Delta Force operative turned contractor, was a man of few words but unwavering principles. His broad shoulders and weathered hands spoke of a life spent in action, not argument. His wife, Emily, was a soft-spoken nurse with a knack for diffusing tension, and their 10-year-old son, Ethan, was a wiry bundle of energy who loved nothing more than tinkering with his remote-controlled cars in the driveway. The Callahans had chosen Meadowview for its promise of safety and stability, a place to give Ethan a normal childhood after years of Jack's deployments. But normalcy in Meadowview came at a cost, one the Callahans were about to discover. The trouble began on a sweltering July afternoon, when Ethan, oblivious to the HOA's labyrinthine rulebook, set up a small ramp in the driveway for his RC car. The ramp, a makeshift contraption of plywood and cinder blocks, was a source of pride for the boy, who spent hours perfecting jumps that sent his toy car soaring. Neighbors occasionally paused to watch, charmed by Ethan's enthusiasm, but Karen Whitlock was not among them. From her air-conditioned SUV, Karen spotted the ramp during one of her patrols, her eyes narrowing behind her oversized sunglasses. To her, the ramp was not a child's plaything but a violation of Meadowview's aesthetic code, specifically Section 3.2.7, which prohibited unsightly structures on visible property. She scribbled furiously on her clipboard, her lips pursed into a thin line of disapproval. By the next morning, a crisp violation notice was taped to the Callahans' front door, demanding the ramp's immediate removal and threatening a $200 fine for non-compliance. Emily read the notice with a sigh, accustomed to Karen's overreach from previous encounters over minor infractions like an unpruned hedge or a basketball hoop left out overnight. Jack, however, felt a spark of irritation. He had faced warlords and insurgents in his military career. A suburban bureaucrat wielding a clipboard didn't intimidate him. Still, for Ethan's sake, he dismantled the ramp that evening, storing it in the garage while reassuring his son they'd find another way to play. But Karen's vigilance didn't end there. Unbeknownst to the Callahans, she had escalated her campaign, enlisting the help of Meadowview's private security firm, a group of overzealous guards who styled themselves as the HOA Enforcement Unit. These weren't your average rent-a-cops. Led by a hulking ex-bouncer named Vince, the unit patrolled in black SUVs, their badges gleaming with self-awarded authority. Karen had given them free rein to enforce her edicts, and they relished the power. Vince, in particular, took a perverse pleasure in intimidating residents, his shaved head and mirrored sunglasses making him a menacing figure in the neighborhood's otherwise idyllic streets. The following week, Ethan, undeterred by the ramp incident, took his RC car to the cul-de-sac at the end of Birch Lane, a spot he thought was safe from Karen's prying eyes. The cul-de-sac was quiet, bordered by a small park where kids often played. Ethan set up a new course, using sticks and pebbles to mark a track, his laughter echoing as the car zipped around. But Karen's network of informants, nosy neighbors who curried her favor, reported the activity within hours. By late afternoon, Vince and two of his guards rolled up in their SUV, their radios crackling with Karen's instructions. Ethan, engrossed in his game, didn't notice their approach until their shadows loomed over him. Vince's voice was a low growl as he ordered Ethan to pack up and leave, citing a vague rule about unauthorized recreational equipment in common areas. Ethan, confused but polite, began gathering his things, his small hands fumbling with the car. In his haste, he dropped it, and the toy skidded toward Vince's polished boots. What happened next was a blur of cruelty. Vince, impatient and eager to assert dominance, grabbed Ethan's arm to pull him away from the car. The boy's fingers, still clutching the controller, caught in the guard's grip, and with a sickening crunch, Vince's force crushed them against the hard plastic. Ethan's scream pierced the air, a sound that would haunt the cul-de-sac for weeks. Emily, who had been watching from the porch, sprinted toward her son, her heart pounding as she saw his crumpled form on the ground. Vince and his men backed away, their faces a mix of defiance and unease, as if they hadn't expected such a visceral consequence to their actions. Emily cradled Ethan, his face pale and tear-streaked, his fingers swollen and bruised, possibly broken. She rushed him to the car, driving to the hospital while her mind raced with fear and fury. At home, Jack received her frantic call, his calm exterior cracking as he heard Ethan's pained sobs in the background. He grabbed his keys, his military instincts kicking in, a cold resolve settling over him like a second skin. At the hospital, doctors confirmed 2 of Ethan's fingers were fractured, requiring splints and weeks of recovery. Emily stayed by his side, her gentle demeanor masking a growing rage. Jack arrived, his presence filling the room with a quiet intensity. He listened as Emily recounted the incident, her voice trembling with indignation. The image of his son's pain, inflicted by a thug playing cop at the behest of a power-hungry HOA president, ignited something primal in Jack. He had spent years protecting others in far-off battlefields. Now, the fight had come to his own doorstep. As the Callahans returned home that night, the neighborhood felt different, its orderly facade now a thin veil over something darker. Jack stood in the driveway, staring at the cul-de-sac where Ethan had been hurt, his fists clenched. Karen's reign, Vince's brutality, it was all part of a system that had overstepped its bounds. Jack wasn't just a father, he was a man trained to dismantle threats, and Meadowview's HOA had just made itself one. The battle lines were drawn, and Jack Callahan was ready to fight. The days following Ethan's injury were a blur of hospital visits, paperwork, and a simmering undercurrent of outrage in the Callahan household. Meadowview Estates, once a haven of suburban tranquility, now felt like a battlefield where the enemy wore polo shirts and wielded rulebooks instead of weapons. Jack Callahan, a man who had faced ambushes in desert wadis and navigated hostile territories, found himself grappling with a new kind of adversary, one that hid behind bureaucracy and petty power. His son's splinted fingers, still swollen and tender, were a constant reminder of the cost of crossing Karen Whitlock and her so-called HOA enforcement unit. Emily, ever the peacemaker, tried to temper Jack's growing anger, urging him to pursue legal recourse rather than confrontation. But Jack's instincts, honed by years in Delta Force, told him that reason alone wouldn't dismantle the tyranny gripping Meadowview. Karen Whitlock, meanwhile, was doubling down. From her pristine home office, adorned with framed HOA certificates and a vision board of perfect community clippings, she orchestrated her next moves with the precision of a general. Ethan's injury, while unfortunate, was in her mind a necessary lesson in compliance. She had no intention of apologizing or reining in Vince's security team. If anything, she saw the incident as proof of her authority. She drafted a new set of regulations, tightening restrictions on outdoor activities and mandating pre-approval for any recreational structures, even in private yards. Notices went out to every household, their tone dripping with condescension, warning of increased patrols and steeper fines. Karen's loyalists, neighbors who thrived on her approval, nodded in agreement during the emergency HOA meeting she convened, while others whispered their dissent in private, too intimidated to challenge her openly. Jack, however, was not one to whisper. He spent hours researching Meadowview's HOA charter, poring over its dense legalese in the dim light of his study. What he found was a web of vague clauses and overreaching powers, designed to give the board unchecked control. The private security firm, he discovered, was not even properly licensed, operating in a gray area of legality that Karen exploited to her advantage. Jack's military training kicked in, his mind mapping out the terrain of this suburban war. He began canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors under the guise of checking on neighbors, but really gauging who might stand with him against Karen's regime. Some residents, like old Mr. Henderson, who had been fined for planting unapproved roses, were eager to vent their frustrations. Others, like the young couple at 52 Birch Lane, were too afraid of retaliation to commit. Jack took mental notes, building a roster of allies and assessing the strength of his opposition. At the same time, Ethan's recovery weighed heavily on the family. The boy, usually so full of life, was subdued, his RC car gathering dust in the garage. Emily noticed how he flinched at sudden noises, his trust in the world shaken by Vince's brutality. She tried to keep things normal, baking his favorite cookies and reading him adventure stories, but the spark in his eyes was dim. Jack, watching his son struggle, felt a knot of guilt tighten in his chest. He had promised Ethan a safe home, a place where he could be a kid, and yet here they were, caught in a power struggle that had left his son hurt. That guilt fueled Jack's resolve, transforming his anger into a focused determination to dismantle the HOA's grip on Meadowview. The tipping point came a week later, when another violation notice arrived, this time citing the Callahan's mailbox for fading paint and demanding a $150 fine. The absurdity of it, targeting a grieving family for a barely noticeable flaw, snapped something in Jack. He drove to the HOA office, a small building at the edge of the neighborhood, where Karen held court. The office was a shrine to her control, with neatly organized files and a wall of photos showing corrected violations. Karen was there, her smile practiced and cold, but Jack didn't confront her directly. Instead, he observed, noting the security cameras, the layout of the building, and the comings and goings of Vince's team. He was gathering intel, just as he had in his military days, preparing for a calculated strike. Back home, Jack began to rally his allies. Mr. Henderson, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the neighborhood's history, revealed that Karen had been elected president through questionable means, her supporters strong-arming votes at the last meeting. Another neighbor, a tech-savvy single mom named Rachel, offered to dig into the HOA's financial records, suspecting Karen was misusing funds to pay Vince's crew. Jack listened, his mind piecing together a strategy. He knew a direct confrontation with Vince would be reckless, too many variables, too much risk to Ethan and Emily. Instead, he needed to expose Karen's overreach, turn the neighborhood against her, and force her to back down. As Jack planned, Karen was escalating her campaign. She announced a mandatory community cleanup day, requiring all residents to attend or face fines. The event was less about cleaning and more about reinforcing her authority, with Vince's team overseeing the effort like prison guards. Jack saw an opportunity. The cleanup would bring the neighborhood together, giving him a chance to sow discontent and build momentum. He spent the evening before the event crafting flyers, printed on Emily's old office printer, that outlined Karen's abuses, fines, intimidation, and now Ethan's injury. He didn't sign them, knowing anonymity would protect him for now, but he slipped them into mailboxes under the cover of night, each one a small spark in what he hoped would become a fire. The cleanup day dawned bright and tense. Residents gathered reluctantly, wielding rakes and trash bags while Vince's men patrolled, their radios crackling. Karen stood at the center, her clipboard in hand, barking orders with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jack was there, blending in, his face a mask of calm as he watched the crowd. He noticed neighbors exchanging glances, some clutching his flyers, others whispering about Ethan's injury. The seeds of rebellion were taking root, but Jack knew it wasn't enough. Karen's grip was strong, and Vince's presence was a physical threat. As the day ended, Jack returned home, his mind racing. He needed something bigger, something undeniable, to break Karen's hold. That night, Rachel texted Jack with a bombshell. She had found discrepancies in the HOA's accounts, thousands of dollars funneled to an unregistered company tied to Vince. It was the leverage Jack needed, but it came with risks. Exposing it would mean taking on Karen and Vince head-on, and Jack knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. The air in Meadowview Estates grew thick with anticipation, as if the neighborhood itself sensed the storm brewing beneath its manicured surface. Jack Callahan, once a soldier who thrived in the chaos of conflict, now navigated a different kind of war, one where the weapons were information, alliances, and carefully timed moves. The discovery of the HOA's financial misconduct, unearthed by Rachel's late-night digging, was a grenade in Jack's arsenal, but he knew pulling the pin required precision. Karen Whitlock's reign, propped up by Vince's thuggish enforcement, had cowed the residents for too long, but Jack's flyers had stirred something. Whispers of dissent rippled through backyard conversations and hurried exchanges at mailboxes. The cleanup day had planted seeds of defiance, and now Jack needed to nurture them into a full-blown uprising. Karen, oblivious to the growing unrest, tightened her grip. She announced a special HOA meeting to address what she called recent disturbances, a thinly veiled reference to Ethan's injury and the anonymous flyers. The meeting was to be held in the community center, a squat building adorned with Karen's curated displays of Meadowview's excellence. She prepared meticulously, her pastel cardigan swapped for a crisp blazer, her clipboard replaced by a tablet loaded with talking points. Vince and his security team would be present, their presence a silent threat to anyone considering dissent. Karen believed the meeting would reassert her dominance, quashing the murmurs of rebellion. She underestimated the man she was up against. Jack spent the days leading up to the meeting strategizing. Rachel's findings were explosive. Over $20,000 in HOA dues had been siphoned to a shell company linked to Vince, disguised as security enhancements. The evidence was digital: bank transfers, invoices, and emails Karen hadn't bothered to encrypt, assuming no one would dare dig. Rachel, with her knack for tech, had compiled a dossier, complete with screenshots and timestamps. Jack knew presenting this at the meeting could turn the tide, but it would also provoke Karen and Vince into a corner. He needed allies to amplify the impact and protect his family from retaliation. He met quietly with Mr. Henderson, who agreed to rally the older residents, and with a handful of others who had suffered under Karen's fines. Together, they formed a loose coalition, each member tasked with spreading the word and bringing others to the meeting. At home, Emily watched Jack's preparations with a mix of pride and dread. Ethan was healing, his fingers still splinted but his spirit slowly returning. He asked questions about the guards, about why they had hurt him, and Emily struggled to shield him from the truth without lying. Jack, meanwhile, kept his plans vague, not wanting to burden her with the risks he was taking. He cleaned his service pistol again, not because he planned to use it, but because the ritual grounded him, a reminder of the control he could exert in a world spiraling toward confrontation. He stored it securely, knowing a physical fight was the last resort, but his Delta Force instincts kept him prepared for every contingency. The night of the HOA meeting arrived, the community center packed with residents, their faces a mix of curiosity, fear, and defiance. Karen stood at the podium, her voice smooth as she outlined new rules and dismissed complaints as misunderstandings. Vince loomed at the back, his arms crossed, his men stationed at the exits. The air was heavy, the tension palpable. Jack sat near the front, his expression neutral but his eyes scanning the room, noting allies like Mr. Henderson and Rachel, who clutched a USB drive with the incriminating evidence. Karen's speech droned on, her confidence unshaken until Mr. Henderson stood, his voice shaky but resolute, and asked about the HOA's budget transparency. The room went silent. Karen's smile faltered, her tablet suddenly a shield she clutched too tightly. She deflected, citing ongoing audits, but Jack saw his opening. He rose, his presence commanding despite his calm tone, and asked why thousands of dollars were being paid to an unregistered security firm. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he held up a printed copy of Rachel's findings, the numbers stark against the white paper. Karen's face reddened, her voice rising as she accused Jack of slander, but the crowd was shifting. Neighbors who had stayed silent now murmured, their frustration emboldened by Jack's stand. Rachel plugged her USB into the community center's projector, and the screen lit up with bank statements, drawing audible reactions from the room. Vince stepped forward, his bulk a warning, but Jack didn't flinch. He locked eyes with the guard, his stare carrying the weight of a man who had faced worse threats than a hired thug. Karen, sensing control slipping, called for order, but the room was unraveling. Residents shouted questions, demanding answers about their dues, their safety, their children. Mr. Henderson recounted his rosebush fine, another neighbor her penalty for a non-compliant fence color. The meeting became a chorus of grievances, each one a crack in Karen's empire. Vince's men shifted uneasily, their radios silent as Karen's authority crumbled, but Karen wasn't done. She stormed out, promising legal action, while Vince lingered, his glare fixed on Jack. The message was clear, this wasn't over. As the crowd dispersed, Jack's allies gathered around him, their resolve hardened. Rachel handed out copies of the evidence, urging neighbors to file complaints with the state. Mr. Henderson organized a petition to dissolve the HOA board. Jack felt a flicker of hope, but he knew Karen and Vince wouldn't surrender easily. They had too much to lose: power, money, control. That night, Jack sat in his study, the dossier spread across his desk. Emily brought him coffee, her hand lingering on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the fight ahead. Ethan slept upstairs, his RC car still untouched, a reminder of why Jack was doing this. Outside, Meadowview was quiet, but Jack knew it was the calm before the storm. Karen would retaliate, and Vince's crew was a wild card. Jack's mind raced through scenarios, his training kicking in. He needed to protect his family, expose Karen's corruption, and free Meadowview from its suburban dictatorship. The meeting had been a victory, but the war was far from won. As dawn broke, a new violation notice appeared on the Callahan's door, this time citing disruptive behavior at the meeting and demanding a $500 fine. Attached was a handwritten note from Karen, her cursive sharp and venomous, "You'll regret this." Jack read it, his jaw tightening. The gauntlet was thrown, and he was ready to pick it up. Meadowview Estates was about to see what happened when a Delta Force dad fought back. The sun rose over Meadowview Estates, casting long shadows across lawns that no longer felt like sanctuaries. The neighborhood, once a bastion of enforced perfection, was now a powder keg, its residents divided between those emboldened by Jack Callahan's stand and those still cowed by Karen Whitlock's reign. The handwritten note on the Callahan's door, with its venomous promise of regret, was a declaration of war. Jack, a man who had faced enemies in far more perilous arenas, recognized the tactic for what it was, a desperate attempt to reassert control. But Karen had underestimated him, and Meadowview was about to witness the full force of a Delta Force dad pushed to his limit. Jack wasted no time. The HOA meeting had exposed Karen's financial misconduct, and the evidence Rachel had compiled was now circulating among the residents, shared in group chats and slipped under doors. The petition to dissolve the HOA board gained signatures daily, with Mr. Henderson tirelessly collecting them from neighbors who had finally found their courage. But Jack knew Karen and Vince wouldn't go quietly. The $500 fine for disruptive behavior was just the beginning. Karen was circling, looking for ways to tighten her grip. Jack's military instincts told him to anticipate her next move, to strike before she could escalate. He spent hours in his study, mapping out a plan that combined legal pressure with community action, all while keeping his family safe. Karen, meanwhile, was spiraling. From her home office, now cluttered with crumpled violation notices and unanswered emails from angry residents, she plotted her counterattack. She called an emergency board meeting, excluding dissenting members, and pushed through a resolution to double security patrols, claiming it was necessary to maintain order. Vince and his team, emboldened by the new mandate, roamed the streets in their black SUVs, their presence more menacing than ever. Karen also hired a lawyer, a slick attorney from a nearby city who specialized in HOA disputes, to bury Jack in legal threats. She sent a cease and desist letter to the Callahans, accusing them of defamation and demanding they retract their claims about the HOA's finances. The letter was a bluff, but it was meant to intimidate, to remind Jack who held the power. Jack, however, was unfazed. He met with Rachel and a small group of allies at Mr. Henderson's house, where they finalized their strategy. Rachel had filed a formal complaint with the state's regulatory agency, attaching the financial evidence, and was working with a local journalist who smelled a story in Meadowview's HOA scandal. Jack, meanwhile, focused on neutralizing Vince's crew. He had observed their patterns, noting their reliance on intimidation rather than skill. They were bullies, not soldiers, and Jack knew how to exploit that. He installed discreet security cameras around his property, documenting every move Vince's team made near his home. He also reached out to a contact from his military days, a private investigator who could dig deeper into Vince's background, suspecting the ex-bouncer had skeletons that could be leveraged. The tension in Meadowview reached a breaking point one humid evening, when Vince's crew targeted another neighbor, a single father named Tom who had signed the petition. They towed his car for a minor parking violation, leaving a $300 fine taped to his door. The act was a message to the neighborhood: defiance would be punished. But it backfired. Tom, furious, posted about the incident online, and the story spread, drawing more residents to Jack's cause. A crowd gathered outside the HOA office the next day, holding signs demanding Karen's resignation. Jack was there, not leading but watching, his presence a quiet anchor for the growing rebellion. Karen, peering through the office blinds, realized her control was slipping. She called Vince, ordering him to handle it. That night, Vince and two of his men approached the Callahan house, their SUV idling ominously at the curb. Jack, alerted by his cameras, watched them from his study, his pulse steady despite the adrenaline. They didn't knock. Instead, they began spray painting "comply" on the Callahan's garage door, a blatant act of intimidation. Jack's training kicked in. He didn't reach for his pistol, too risky with Emily and Ethan asleep upstairs, but he grabbed a flashlight and slipped out the back door, circling around to confront them from the shadows. His voice, low and commanding, stopped them mid-act. Vince, caught off guard, tried to bluster, but Jack's presence, honed by years of facing down threats, was overwhelming. He warned them to leave, his tone leaving no room for argument. The guards backed off, retreating to their SUV, but not before Vince muttered a promise to return. The next morning, Jack shared the camera footage with Rachel, who uploaded it to the neighborhood's social media group. The video went viral within hours, shared beyond Meadowview to local news outlets. The journalist Rachel had published a scathing exposé, detailing the HOA's financial misconduct and Vince's intimidation tactics, complete with Jack's footage. The state launched an investigation, and Karen's lawyer began backpedaling, unable to defend the mounting evidence. Residents, now fearless, flooded the HOA office with complaints, and the petition to dissolve the board reached enough signatures to force a vote. Karen's empire crumbled swiftly. At the vote, held in the same community center where she had once ruled, residents overwhelmingly demanded new leadership. Karen, humiliated, resigned before the results were official, fleeing Meadowview in disgrace. Vince and his crew vanished, their contract terminated by the new interim board led by Mr. Henderson. The state's investigation later uncovered enough evidence to press charges against Karen for embezzlement, and Vince faced scrutiny for his unlicensed security operations. Meadowview began to heal, its rules rewritten to prioritize community over control. For the Callahans, the victory was bittersweet. Ethan's fingers healed, but the scars of that day lingered. Jack and Emily worked to rebuild his confidence, setting up a new RC car track in the backyard, now free of HOA restrictions. Neighbors stopped by to cheer Ethan on, their support a testament to the community Jack had helped reclaim. Jack himself felt a weight lift, the soldier in him satisfied that the threat was neutralized. He stood in the driveway one evening, watching Ethan's car soar over a ramp, Emily's laughter mingling with their son's. Meadowview was no longer a battleground, it was home. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Jack reflected on the fight. He had faced warlords and insurgents, but this battle, fought for his son, his family, his neighbors, was the one that mattered most.